Brinda, a very warm welcome to you for this lecture, which we've been looking forward to. We had arranged it with you in your busy schedule way back in June or July. We had booked you for this talk, and this was the earliest convenient date. So I'm glad it is happening this evening. And on behalf of the chairman and trustees of the CSMVS, on behalf of myself and my executive committee at the Museum Society of Mumbai, and several of our guests who've joined us today, and our members, a very warm welcome to you, Brinda, and really appreciate your taking time off on what is going to be a very interesting lecture, ladies and gentlemen, Buildings and Beyond, an architect's journey through the Indian landscape. It is really my pleasure to introduce one of our leading architects. I won't qualify her as a woman architect alone. She is one of our leading architects and an urban conservationist, Brinda Somaiya. Upon completion of a Bachelor of Architecture from Mumbai University and a Master of Arts from Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, USA, she started her firm, Somaiya and Kalappa Consultants, in 1978 in Mumbai. In May 2012, she was conferred an honorary doctorate from her alma mater, Smith College. In 2014, she was awarded the Indian Institute of Architects Baburao Mhatre Gold Medal for a lifetime achievement in this field. In 2015, she was honored as a distinguished professor by the Indian Education Society's College of Architecture, IES, Mumbai. In 2017, she joined the board of Wholesome Foundation for Sustainable Construction, Zurich, Switzerland, and was also elected as an A.D. White Professor at Large by Cornell University, USA. Over 4 decades, she has merged architecture, conservation, and social equity in projects ranging from institutional campuses, rehabilitation of an earthquake-torn village, to restoration of an 18th century cathedral, showing that progress and history need not be at odds. Her belief that the architect's role, I quote, "The architect's role is that of a guardian, as a conscience keeper of the built and unbuilt environment," close quote. This underlines the very premise of her body of work. She's a founder trustee of Hair Foundation, which has brought out several publications on heritage and architecture, as well as lecturing on the same. In 2000, she curated a monumental conference titled Women in Architecture 2000 and organized a seminal exhibition on the work of women architects with a special focus on South Asia, including all our neighbors across all our borders. In 2020, in the COVID times, she chaired an international conference, Women in Design, plus a landmark event for women designers from across the globe. She showcased their work as well as to provide a platform to collaborate. And needless to say, she has many, many publications and articles, professional ones in professional journals spanning the last 40 years, 45 years of her career. So what are we going to hear today? What is so special? Well, whether it involves the restoration of a rural Indian village, the creation of a corporate campus, the rejuvenation of city monuments, or the establishment of an academic institution, Brinda Somaiya has successfully created a practice that covers the many faces of this Indian landscape. Her reputation has been built on her unique ability to find the appropriate way to build. An overview of some of her completed works shows each project excuse me, having its own original and unique architectural interpretation. This clarity of vision will be presented in a journey of her 4 decades of practice. Brinda will share how she built her practice in India and will focus on this journey with us, the experiences and the challenges she faced. Her works include the rehabilitation, as I said earlier, of an earthquake-devastated village, restoration of a cathedral in the city of Mumbai, as well as the 20th century Louis Kahn buildings, creation of educational and information technology campuses, collaboration on the tallest residential towers in India, and the conversion of a massive garbage dump or several dumps into beautiful, usable community parks and plazas. Special mention must be made of her work on women architects and for women construction labor, which is well known, including the inclusion of Indian crafts in her projects, thus helping ensure the continuity of India's rich cultural heritage. Her talk will take us through the enormous changes that India has gone through since independence in 1947 and the challenges we continue face today with a population of over 1.3 billion people catalyzing rapid urbanization. Her primary belief, and she strongly believes this and it underlines all her work, is the architect's role. And she describes it very appropriately is that of a guardian. He or she, as the case may be, and today it's Brinda, is the conscience of the built and unbuilt environment. So Brinda, thank you so very, very much. We're looking forward to your lecture. And once again, on behalf of all of us present and those who've tuned in from across the globe, so many students who will get to see your work probably for the first time. And we greatly appreciate any student body that joins us for our events. So before I hand you over to the technical team, I have to thank them because without them, we cannot do these Zoom webinars. So tech team, thank you so much. This evening, we have Aishwarya, Mrinalini, Yashraj, ably led by our Honorary Secretary, Professor Jason Johns. So over to you, tech team. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Sit back and enjoy this really informative, well-curated lecture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Feroza, for this very generous introduction. I would also like to thank the Museum Society of Mumbai and the CSMVS, Dr. Godrej and Dr. Mukherjee for this invitation, and to Jason and his team for all their support. It's been a real challenge, as Feroza said, for me to decide what I could show you today. I've been working for almost 4 decades, and there's no way I could compress it into an hour of 45 minutes or an hour talk. So I decided just to share my personal journey, my personal story, and weave narratives of different projects that I have come across or that I've assisted in or designed during this journey. Because it has been a long journey, you may feel that I cannot go into depth of every project, but I do want to show you the diversity that our particular studio, SNK, has and does in its projects. We come from a very complex country. It's multicultural, multi-religious, the geography, the landscape, the social, the languages, the food, everything is so different in different parts of the country. And that's been my greatest joy in working in India. Jason, I will now share my screen. So there must be very few countries in the world where architects have such varied challenges as we have in South Asia today. Our involvement ranges from upgradation of slums to large corporate and public buildings, from low-income housing to the restoration of magnificent vernacular and colonial buildings. Wonderful, exciting, and fulfilling tasks that span our careers and take us from being high-tech professionals to barefoot architects. Our Indian traditions are a source of inspiration to us architects as we attempt to infuse meaning into our work. The contemporary architecture of India today is the built expression of an interaction between a global culture and our rich past. Hindu, Buddhist, and Islamic traditions were followed by the colonial influence and finally post-independence of international architects like Le Corbusier, Louis Kahn, and of course our great masters, including Professor Doshi, who has recently won both the Pritzker Prize and the gold medal of the Royal Institute of British Architects. In fact, some might shrink from the very idea of an Indian architecture at all. The Indian architect, slowly starting from the 70s, I believe he or she has come into their own in the 21st century. So buildings and beyond, because as Firoza has already explained, I believe the role of the architect goes way beyond buildings. And I believe in a small way, as Mahatma Gandhi said, we can shake the world. So I'm an Indian, and all what I am comes from my heritage and naturally reflects in my work. That goes without saying. So starting, I'm post-independence born, but very close to independence. So what happened after independence? At the stroke of the midnight hour, Nehru said, India will awake to life and freedom. And what did he believe in at that time? The partition, of course, we know the image in the center shows how even libraries, that's a library in Calcutta, where even the books were being divided. And I'm sure all of you have seen images like this. So why is it important to again remember? Because at that time, say 1947 to 50, they brought in law and economic stability and institutional building. The picture to the right shows the very first Indian Institute of Technology, which is in Kharagpur. And the picture in the middle shows how women laborers were working and perhaps are still working in the coal mining industry in India. So Nehru believed that he should also bring in international architects to show that we are now coming out of what has gone before and into something new and challenging. He brought in Jane Drew and Maxwell Fry, two wonderful British architects, who in turn brought in actually Le Corbusier and Pierre Jeanneret to do Chandigarh and various buildings in Ahmedabad, etc. This was followed by our masters. We had a group of very, very important architects during those 30, 40 years, Charles Correa, Kanvinde, Rajay Doshi, who of course, as I mentioned, and Rahman and Raval. But very little is said about the women who worked with all these people at that time. From Perrin Mistry, our very first woman architect of our country, to Praveena Mehta, who worked with Correa on many projects, including Kanchenjunga, and with Hema Sankale. And finally, Lavina Kolgan Modi, who was Pilu Modi's wife and worked in India and who recently passed away. So I believe I belonged to the bridge generation, the architectural space between these great masters, men and women, and the current generation. So why did I become an architect? There I am on the left with my hand on my hip. I was just 6 years old and my parents took me to Nalanda. And I will never forget that monastery and the brick. At that time, I wanted to become an archaeologist, but eventually became an architect. My father was a power engineer, my mother a zoologist. I grew up in the city of Mumbai. Luckily for me, in a wonderful Claude Batley house, which I think certainly made me appreciate design to a great extent. Studied in Mumbai at the JJ, did the usual round with us from the colleges to the Taj to Chandigarh. We were just 10% of girls in the class, and you can see in the upper picture how all of us girls were sitting in the front row. So now things have changed a lot. We have almost 60% women, but there are not 60% women working in the field of architecture. So they become invisible, or where do they go? But that's for another day. That's another story. I then started my own studio in an old dilapidated Mali shed, and finally built my way up, worked in different parts of India and also internationally. That's a picture of me in the Soviet Union. I built a hotel in Tashkent when I wasn't even 40 years old. And the picture to the right is my daughter Nandini, lawyer turned architect, who now works with me and believes that I believe that the studio is in very safe hands. So what is the Indian architectural vocabulary that my studio has believed in? Simple elements of water, walls, light, geometry, and materials. These are all images of our work. And that shows how we can work. How do we build appropriately? That is because architecture is beyond buildings. Whether it's infrastructure, connections of people, a sense of belonging, a sense of place, a sense of memory, a sense of history, and of course, community itself. So over the years, we built all over India, right from the Himalayas in the north to the deep south, from East Calcutta to Kutch, through central India, through the tribal areas of Jharkhand. So all the red dots are where we have built. We believed we must protect our heritage. We fought for cities and our open spaces and built for the rural and the urban population and shared the culture. The two yellow dots, since we have limited time naturally, are the two areas that I'm going to talk about today. I've chosen naturally our wonderful city of Mumbai to show you how an architect has a responsibility and can do so many different types of work within the city of Mumbai. And then I have chosen a village in Gujarat, which we restored after the massive earthquake of 2000. These are, of course, over the 40 years, all the projects we have done. Firoza mentioned from campuses, enormous IT and educational campuses, schools, hospitals, and every possible type of work. So Shabana Azmi said, I love Mumbai. It is my city. Mumbai is in my bloodstream. I love her diversity, her pluralism, her festivals, and her vibrancy. I may groan about the traffic, moan about the pollution, fret about the shrinking of open spaces, but I can't live anywhere else in the world. So I think that reflects my belief as well. And that's why I've chosen my city to talk about my work. I think all of you know about this. A lot of people are from Mumbai, how it was a series of islands brought together, and how it grew these wonderful lithographs, which we can find in many parts of our city today. And finally, of course, the Oval and the great heritage site and the heritage buildings that we have. But we also know that 41% of our people live in informal settlements in the city. But we have to understand that these are cities within the city. They are actually much more environmentally conscious than many of us who live in towers. And they have something called a circular economy, which is now a very, very important sentence with today's climate change. I don't have time naturally to tell you about it, but I think all of you need to understand what really happens in these informal settlements and not look at them just as slums. It is a great city of contrasts. We all know that. So I've chosen a few words today, and I will connect projects with some of these words of empowerment, waste, conservation, the street, craft and culture, collaboration, and rematerializing housing. So talking about empowerment, architecture must arouse, inspire, and feed the human spirit. The need is for professional concern with the environment and improved quality of human life for all people. Hence, the need is to train a new kind of professional who can intervene and be effective both in our poorer villages and our wealthier urban areas. We need designers who can plan, design, and implement new developments, working interactively with the community at large. If we follow the role of the traditional architect, we cannot meet this need. We have to go beyond buildings, which is the title of my talk, and work with programs that transform society. Design has to be and is a process. I believe this can be done without compromising on creativity, innovation, or quality of design. So these are the dialogue, community, and empowerment projects, which I will just touch on. Why are they so important? The Nityanand Ashram taught me my biggest lesson, which took me through much of my life. I was approached by a client of mine saying that we want to redo the plaza around the Nityanand temple, but the shopkeepers are not moving, although we have built another set of shops for them, and we don't understand why. So can you help us? So I said, okay. I went there, and on the way I asked my client, I said, did anybody ask them what they wanted? And they looked at me like, why should we ask them what they wanted? We were building them something better than what they had. They should have just shifted in. So when I went, I asked the shopkeepers, I said, why aren't you guys moving out? You're supposed to have better shops built. They said, you know, we don't sell all our flowers in one day. We need to elevate the platform on which we sit, because the cool area underneath the platform is where we store the flowers for the next day. We also need to have certain nails and certain way of showing our flowers. We also have to be on the way to the temple. We cannot be tucked away in one corner. They wanted simple requirements. So I redesigned, we rebuilt, and they moved without any fuss. So here you can see them to the right. They moved from where they were in the middle of the plaza, and the plaza was redone. It was such a simple solution, but nobody asked them. There was no dialogue. Nobody asked them, what is it you want? For Colaba Woods, it was, of course, opposite where I was staying. A group of people got together, sponsored by the Tata Group. And it was a group of, it had a lot of garbage. It had some PWD, dilapidated housing. And it was just a dump. We got together, a whole group of us. And of course, many of you may know Colaba Woods. But what was important is when we planted the trees, everyone would give suggestions, do this, do that. We decided just to plant trees, create a small amphitheater, and create a small gazebo where people from the slums could come, the children, because they didn't at that time have space or proper electricity in their slum houses. And when we opened, everybody wanted to charge 1 rupee or 2 rupees per child per day. And we fought against it because we said there is no way any mother is going to give a slum child, and they may have 3 or 4, a rupee a day to go to the park. And it is these children who have protected the park, not the children from the high rise you see on the left. It is these children who have protected the park until, of course, the metro has come and there are certain issues going on. We use the gray water from the buildings around to irrigate. This is the gazebo I told you about. And this is how the children enjoy it. They don't come and sit on benches. You can see how they use the park. So you'll have people like this, and you'll have a girl from the high rise in her shorts and Adidas shoes also running about. This is the society that we want, the egalitarian society. It may not be economically, everybody's the same, but the feeling is that we are all one and we belong to each other. And this was a little orphanage that was just outside Mumbai, because the girl child, many young girl children were left under flyovers, and a group called The Voice, which is an NGO, decided to build a sort of a residential place for them. And Aldo van Eyck said, it is devilishly hard to combine, let alone reconcile, the task of an architect with his involvement in the socio-political sphere and what it means to be loyal to both at once. Loyal in such a way that one sustains the other. So we use we had very small budget. We use very basic materials, a brick dome, brick parapets, a sort of a plan that enclosed the space so that the children felt protected. Because children should feel comfortable. They don't come from high rises or wealthy backgrounds. How do we ensure that they feel comfortable in the space that we as architects design for them? We're not designing for ourselves, we're designing for them. And you can see I had to use every inch of space. I had to use every inch of space. You can see over here, even below the staircase, we put where the children learn to sew, and toilet, teaching them how about cleanliness, about sanitation. So hats off to boys, creation of open space. It doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be fancy, but it had to be there. That was what was important. And these are the children who have come out. So it gives us great satisfaction as architects to work on such things. So throughout my presentation, I'm going to show you today, which I've shown you just now, 3 projects which are completed. There are only 2 projects I'm showing you which are not completed. I want to show them to you because I hope the young people who are watching this will take these 2 projects forward for the city of Mumbai. And one is the Mumbai Esplanade project. And we all know how lakhs and lakhs of people fall out of the VT station and the Churchgate station. And what Apostrophe A&D, an urban design firm, and my studio SNK, we came out with a solution of creating a single contiguous landscape area. We all know the Oval Maidan, Azad Maidan, and the 3 Maidans. And we suggested that the cars could go underground like you see in any city in Europe, any city in Europe. I was privileged enough to go to Madrid 2 weeks ago. I had been there many years ago, and the change in the city is unbelievable. They've restored their wonderful heritage centers, they've pedestrianized their centers, they've taken their cars underground and created gardens and parks at the pedestrian level. Why can't we do this? I worked on it for 2 years. We created lots of drawings. We were having a plaza where they come out of VT, another plaza where they come out of Churchgate. You can see the Flora Fountain Center. We worked out the details of ramps. But you see, unless there is bureaucratic and political support, it is very difficult in our country to get projects of this size, city projects, done. We need to get the people of the city involved. And this was the Kala Goda. But I hear now that the present government and the younger ministers over there are talking about pedestrianizing. So even if we're 10 years behind, 15 years behind, to me, it doesn't matter. We've got huge amount of data. We've done all the research. We're ready to share it with the city when they're ready to apply it and make our city a beautiful pedestrian city. We got the best support, of course. We had an exhibition and the best support from the press, as you can imagine. There are just 2 slides I want to show you on waste because we need a circular economy today. And I'm just showing you a small little balwadi we did in the Worli slum, which had absolutely no money. And they came to me for this women's center. So all we did was ask some of our contractors to give us their waste material, tiles of different colors, the leftover paint, leftover fans, everything that was left over or taken from old buildings. And we rebuilt this little building. And I'm just showing it to you to show you nothing should be wasted. The embodied energy in our buildings, whether it's a heritage building or an ordinary building, should be saved. Only then can we have a circular economy. Now I come to the second section, which is conservation. Octavio Paz, poet extraordinaire, essayist and diplomat from Mexico, was a friend of India. India, its peoples, cultures, and philosophies left an indelible mark on Paz. He was deeply moved and inspired by the multiplicity of times and civilizations that comprise the idea of an Indian nation. He said of India, "The past is not past, it is still passing by." That is perhaps true of many of the nations of this region, but the demolition man is busy at work in many of our cities wiping away the past at a frenetic pace. I believe that if we want the future generations to feel a link with their cultural and historic roots, it is imperative that we preserve the physical heritage of the past. If that link is lost, people will lose their sense of identity, their national pride, and finally, their self-esteem. This was a paragraph which I have been reading out for the last 20 years, exactly what I read out to you just now. So things have to change. I've chosen four very different conservation projects to run through: the Great St. Thomas's Cathedral, the Pettit Hospital for Animals, the Seva Sadan, and the Rajabai Clock Tower. So where there's a tiny little building like a hospital, animal hospital, a sort of central Mumbai, not colonial Seva Sadan, whether it's the Rajabai Clock Tower or St. Thomas Cathedral, each one has embodied energy and a place in our city. So these are some of the buildings that my studio has restored in the heart of Mumbai. Last year, in the middle of the pandemic, also we finished the international headquarters of Bharat Petroleum. We did the international headquarters of the Tata Group. And then, of course, the cathedral schools, the Old Yacht Club, and many, many other buildings. So you all know, of course, the wonderful St. Thomas Cathedral, which we restored. But what was very special here was the school decided to restore the small little buildings that existed on the side of the church, not destroy them, make them into the baby school, the infant school. And then the money that they probably earn, they use also to keep up. That means they've taken the responsibility of maintaining and looking after the church. And unless after we restore, we do not keep aside a certain amount of money, create a basic resource, the interest from which goes towards maintenance of the building, we are going to lose our buildings, because old buildings need to be maintained. So you can see how a corpus has to be created. So you can see the children here using the church, and I think nothing can be more wonderful. This little hospital, I don't know about this part of it, we were asked to help with the animals, the small animals, the dogs, cats, and of course the cow shed. You can see how it was and how we restored it. Just showing you a few images, how everything in our city needs help. You don't have to be some big firm or some great big architect. Anybody can do this sort of work, these sort of ideas. The Seva Sadan was a special job, which we recently finished a couple of years ago. I think many of you know that the Malabari Hall was actually used, the income generated from it was used, of course, for looking after the girls as well. So the Seva Sadan decided they wanted to upgrade it, which was a wonderful challenge for us. This is the hall at the opening when they had different functions for it. And these are some images after we restored the building, air conditioned it, put in new lighting, new sound systems. And these to the left are the women, decades and decades and decades ago. And to the right are the women who are working even today. So it was a fascinating project. And of course, the Rajabai and the university library. We did it in 2 phases. There wasn't a single drawing. We had to start from scratch. And we restored the building structurally as best we could, because heritage buildings cannot always be brought up to today's codes. And we have to be very careful with seismic issues. So it's a big challenge and there are no easy answers. The clock had to also keep working. And the second phase was, of course, lighting the building itself. I think some of you must have seen it as well, some before and after pictures. And of course, this was amazing. It had years and years of paint and polish. The vaulted roof had become almost black, and we took it back to its wonderful teak color. And here are some images post-completion. Now I'm going to the street, the 3rd section. There is no doubt that today, for various reasons, our influence on society as architects is diminishing. We have to broaden our role to affect positive change. Today, we architects have a vital role in shaping our environment, and should go beyond the design of individual buildings. We have to establish systems and principles for the growth and organization of our cities and our environment. So I've chosen one street where I worked from 1990 right up till 2018 to show you how aspirations of people of the city have changed with the young. The NRK house we did in 1990, which was the restoration of an old creche, which was part of the Kamla Mills, and we made it into an office, a series of tiny little buildings we made into the NRK house. Then we did the Brady Gladys, which was a low rise, where we stepped the building so that each floor had a garden and a sense of Parel full of gardens and chimneys was there. Then we took an old mill. The client came to us and said he wanted to convert it into an institute of learning. We call that re-architecture or adaptive reuse. And finally, we worked with very important, the I.M. Pei, who was one of the most world famous architects. We worked with his studio to work on the World One Towers, because we understand how the city has changed, how the cost of land has gone up, how people's dreams and requirements have gone up. So the question is always going to be, do we need high rises? Can we save everything? Should everything be adaptive reuse? Can we build new but low? There are no easy answers. And that is why I believe that whatever we architects can do in a positive way, we should do. So as it turned out, these 4 projects ended up actually in one, connected space. All these spaces are connected. You can actually see in this one picture, the towers, NRK House, Empire Mills, and the Brady Gladys. We never realized because there were 4 different clients, but it really became important. And that's why I've called it the street, because that's how we have lost, of course, all our chimneys and our magnificent, beautiful industrial textile buildings, which other countries like Manchester and all have restored and made into such wonderful centers. So to the left, it shows you the 4 red dots ended up being the 4 buildings we were connected with in the last 30 years. And to the right is the little site plan. So the scale changes, the heights change, the importance change. So here's NRK House, how we restored it. We were sensitive to the street. We kept the height the same as it was before. We created a series of little pavilions connected by greenery. It was beautiful. It was lovely. Then we built the new building, but it was low. You can see the picture to the right is actually the first floor. So we created gardens on each floor. And then this was the mill. It was actually a cement. You can see the cement bags. We kept the wonderful red trusses. You can't afford to build like this today with tall columns and wonderful trusses, north light coming in. We created a sense of a street, but from an institute of learning, it became so popular for TV serials that I heard they were using it a lot for that. You can see the north light, wonderful north light. You never see that today, creeping into the library and into the sewing, the design areas, the design center over here. So anything can happen. This is all inside an abandoned factory. It's not like you all the time have to build big structures. And here is the big World Tower, the residential complex that we built. But one thing we were able to do was we kept the connection between the 2 roads on the 2 sides so that anybody can walk through this and then go into the complex. So we didn't create a gated complex from the main roads. And that was something that the client and all of us worked for and believed in. So the challenges are many and different. The next one is craft and culture. It is the museum. I could not resist showing what we've done at the CSMBS. And Neil MacGregor said, to make sense of India, one must understand its relationship with the outside world, its interactions, its analogies, its shifting identity over time and across space. Writing history through text is a familiar process, but with objects, an opposite approach is required. What we need is an act of imagination. So we would like to, of course, always thank the museum and Dr. Sabyasachi for giving us these opportunities. We did the Textile Gallery in 2016. Then we did India and the World, which was, of course, unfortunately, it was not a permanent exhibition. So I'm running you through that, whereas the others you can always see. The Living Cathedral also was not permanent, but the Money and Jewelry Gallery is permanent. So here are just some images for anyone who has not been to the Textile Gallery. We don't have time to go into it in detail, but working very close with the curators of the museum and all the museum people, we were able to jointly have the Textile Gallery. The Living Cathedral was connected, of course, celebrating St. Thomas Cathedral. And the school came to us to do this exhibition. This was also a temporary exhibition. And, you know, we can use many, many different ways of working on exhibition and galleries. And we ended with time. You can see how the city changes with images of time, a combination of objects and of images, of technology. And the Money and Jewelry Gallery, which I think has recently reopened, which was wonderful also to work with. So today I'm just going to tell you a few things about India and the world, because that's gone. The exhibition tells the viewer 9 stories of important historical eras in Indian history and what was going on in the rest of the world at that time. That is what made this exhibition so different. The aim was to engage the visitor in discussion, exploring not only similarities, but also the differences which demonstrate respect for parallel systems of knowledge, as well as present opportunities to learn something new. This helps us understand how we relate to the world today. So we decided to work on a linear path. Everyone feels, especially in the West, that time moves on a linear path. We took the idea that time moves in a circle, like time is alive. And we use that idea to design this particular exhibition complex. So coming in from Mumbai with its noise, we sort of took you into a darker sphere so that your senses would be stilled, your eyes would rest, and then brought you in to the main galleries using different colors for the different galleries. It was to celebrate 70 years of Indian independence, working with the CSMBS, the British Museum, and the National Museum. There were 196 objects, which was a wonderful challenge, starting with shared beginnings and the first cities. You can see the brickwork of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. You can see that as the background. Then we went to the grand empires. We all know the Gupta, the Maurya, so many wonderful empires. And picturing the divine, how religion was looked at. And what was interesting here, you see a wooden image of Christ and a stone Ganesh. And what would you think? Perhaps that the Christ came from the West and the Ganesh from India. But in reality, the Christ is from Goa and the Ganesh is from Indonesia. So that shows how our wonderful global world was connected at that time. Then we went on to Indian Ocean traders. You know, of course, we have the wonderful Arabian Sea, the Bay of Bengal, the Indian Ocean, what came across, what went from India, and the courtly cultures, the different courts that we have. We took them through this sort of arched feeling of richness into the court. And finally, the quest for freedom. We used the idea of grills to show the prison sense of feeling. But this was very interesting. We began with a sense of darkness, and we ended with Talur's Unicode. As you know, this is the great Nataraja. But what Talur has done is he's removed, of course, the Shiva, and he has put there concrete and coins. And that is what is that what it is today? That is the question. The next one is collaboration in the circular economy. This is the second project that I told you we have not been able to execute. Many people, it was a competition. I think it was won by a group of architects, but nothing was implemented For this, we collaborated with people from around the world. We had ecological designers, landscape naturalists, bridge designers, urban planners, which shows that today architecture is not something that you do alone. It has to be a collaborative effort. It's got to be many, many aspects to it, and we have to work together. And that's why I'm showing you this. It's something that we all did together and which could easily be done. I think many of you may know the MNP along the Mithi River. Our project was chosen by the London Design Biennale to be shown at the India Pavilion this year. We called it a line across history, creating a new forest and a new public engagement on the banks of the Mithi River in Mumbai. So of course, we come through Dharavi. You can see how this is a story in itself, how they managed to survive, how they build up, how they live. And it has 520 acres in Dharavi and 5,000 industries, $1 billion in income comes in every year into this area, and huge amount of recycling. We recycle almost 60% of our plastic waste, unlike the United States, which recycles 9%. And we got this data from, I have mentioned there below. So we should also not think that these areas have to be removed and made into something else. These are vital, very, very important, sustainable cities within cities. Improve them, empower them, let them have their land, let it belong to them. Then they will invest their money to improve their conditions. So you cannot just decide that I'm going to raise everything and then build towers. That's not going to work. And they work so efficiently, it is just unbelievable, right from collection to the end product. And the nature park is a landfill park along the Mithi River. So we took that as the second challenge, how we would reforest it, how we would clean up the river. So this was our project from the Bandra Kurla complex on the other side, which is the aspirational side. You start from the Dharavi slum, through the nature park, through the Mithi River, and come out across. So therefore, this is the line we believed in, that Mumbai can do this. We can create these connections, the idea of connections, the idea of different aspirations of different people within our great city. So there's history, there's community, there's a working landscape, there's connectivity, and there's aspirations. So these are some of the images that are drawings that we show. We created a central area which could have a museum. We reforested. I mean, these are ideas, which again, I hope the young people who are listening will take forward and do. And we actually showed how the reforestation could take place, how it could be thickened. There's so much of knowledge in this country. We have so many people who are willing to give their time and energy to the city, if only these things would be implemented. And then we said, what are the other things that these people need? They have a park, medicinal herbs, urban farms, pottery, hydroponics, recycling, composting. All this can be done within this area without any effort. And this picture to the left shows this landfill, because the MNP is also a landfill. We want to show how the different landfill took place over time. And then finally, the bridge. So you can see they may live in Dharavi, but what is their aspiration? They want a bridge so that they can get across to the other side instead of catching buses or walking, which takes so much time. So what is the infrastructure that we need? Do we only need a coastal road that will take more and more cars? Or do we need to put a bridge from Dharavi to BKC, which is going to help a million people stay in Dharavi? What are our priorities? What should we do for our city? So these were the two projects I wanted to show you, which have not reached fulfillment, but the ideas are there. During this time, I started the Hekar Foundation, Heritage, Education, Conservation. We bring out different books, including Nandini edited my recent book, which is Works and Continuities. The two exhibitions that Firoza also spoke about, Women in Design. You can see we were having a great time in 2000, and an even better time celebrating the work that all of us women have done in the last many, many decades. We had exhibition of our work, but while that is happening, what about women in construction? Why are they still carrying those pots of cement in their head? Why are they not becoming masons and painters? Why are there not proper, adequate rooms for them to stay? Why are there no creches on construction sites? Why are there no schools on construction sites? Now, many contractors don't want women on construction sites because they don't want children. There are fewer women today in many of my sites than when I began many years ago. And these are all images I have taken. You can see they're still carrying on their heads, but at least they've got a helmet many, many years ago. To the right, this is a hotel that we did in a remote area of near Udaipur, which was a beautiful, beautiful fort. This was the Goa Institute of Management, a greenfield campus where we've been working for the last 10 years. And these are a group of women. But what we did here, I insisted that the contractor start a school. He said, I cannot have many classes. I said, it doesn't matter. The children are small. You can have many different age groups, but you have to have a class, 1 or 2 classes, and you have to have teachers. So we insisted at least on that. And finally, this is a campus which we did in Indore. It was a massive campus, a million square feet for Tata Consultancy Services, a difficult project over barren land. But look at these women now today. They've got their dabbas in their hands, they've got shoes, they've got jackets, and they've got their helmets. And that's me with a cap on the left side. And I felt very pleased that by people understanding that we as architects, we are not going to accept mediocre conditions for the men and women construction. There are many stories today I don't have time to share with you, but how they share responsibility of their children, how they share their money, how they share their income. These are just wonderful stories about women in construction. Now I come to the last project of mine, which I'm showing you today, which is my village. I've gone to the rural area. When we design for a more beautiful world, we embrace the power bestowed upon us and fulfill our fiduciary responsibility to serve and protect the public good. All architecture is social. The question is how we design processes to foster beauty, to reinforce the social fabric, but most important, to improve lives in the communities in which we serve. So Badli was destroyed completely by the earthquake in 2001. I have this wonderful client who we do other work for, but we also do pro bono work for him. So soon after this, he called me, he said, Brinda, we have to go and find a village that we want to restore. So we took us time to find a village because what happened was all the villages which had a Muslim majority were taken by Muslim NGOs to look after, the Hindu majority, Hindu NGOs to look after. So we found this wonderful village called Badli, which had a disproportionate and unusual mix of different religions. It's the most wonderful village that I have ever seen. This was a picture I took of the school after the devastation, the map of India you can see. It was a Friday, I think some of you may remember, it was Republic Day, and it was a very, very bad earthquake. There was nothing left between the sky and the earth. Everything had been demolished. These are pictures I have taken. 90% of the village had gone. So we walked through, and then what was amazing, after we found the village, thanks with the help of Shrujan and many other NGOs, the woman, the Sarpanch was a woman, and we worked very closely with her, and we realized one very important thing. This is what the villagers did not want. What is easy for government and semi-government organizations to do is to find an empty piece of land and build houses like this, like they did in Latur also. And when we spoke to the villagers, this is what they did not want. So we did a lot of research. We actually mapped the entire village, and we found that they wanted to be back in their own piece of land, next to their own neighbor, and not a house like that. They needed a little open space to keep their cow or their goats or their donkeys or whatever it was. So I told them, it's very cold. You're going to sit out till we, rebuild all this. They said, yes, we will sleep in the open, but we don't want to leave our piece of land. So that is what we did. Then what happened, the client told me that I will pay for all the materials. We will get it at a good price. And I want the villagers to rebuild their own houses. This was very important for me because there was depression in the village. We wanted them to get a sense of self-worth. And we said we would pay them for their labor. So we would be actually creating jobs, creating income, and self-worth. So we designed my studio designed 3 types of houses depending on, the house they had, whether it was a 1-room or a 2-room or a 3-room. Finally, you can see to the right, they began to rebuild their own houses one by one. Here's an image. We helped them. We had engineers. We saved all the doors and windows. This is what I call rematerializing material, rematerializing housing, reusing, readapting, recycling, retrofitting, restoring. These are the words we need to use in architecture, not just build some grand building and see it, on getting some big award. That's not what architects today need to do as a responsibility. So we saved all the doors and windows. It even came out in the New York Times because it was so reasonably built. And this is after many years. You can see they've all put back their original doors and windows sitting outside. And they were very artistic people. So we gave them the materials so that they could design and, do many other things on the facades. Everyone in the village got together, rebuilt the dargah, rebuilt the temple together. As you know, after an earthquake, the water goes brine, gets saltish. So we had watershed management. The village has won many awards for plantation of trees. And these to the left, me and the 2 engineers who worked on it. And you can see we were again a group of women. The second one from the right was the boss, the sarpanch, and I had to obey her. I had to drink some purple drink she would give me. I dare not say no. Then she would give me peanuts and raw mangoes cut up, and I just had to accept whatever she gave me. We also then rebuilt the school, and a farmer nearby gave us his part of his land so that we could build a women's center and the school. So we built the school very economically. It's a wonderful school. It actually won an international award of one of the great buildings of the 21st century, although it's such a tiny little school. You can see over here, the children get lunch. They love it. Here are pictures of the free lunch, the classrooms. And this is Mezabeen. This was Mezabeen when I went in 2002. She was a little girl, and she was one of those who was sleeping out in the open. In 2006, when I went, the school had been rebuilt. She was in school. And in 2016, she was getting ready to go to college. And that's her story. There's a small film that I'm showing you. One thing I forgot to tell you is that when the school opened, they embroidered a sari for me, which I then wore for my daughter's engagement. And that's such a precious gift, more than any amount of fees that we can get. So I believe that architects, we are not stars. We can't work as stars. We have to work as constellations. And I want to end with a little story. This is my last slide. About a bird, because I believe, again, I hope there's students listening. I know Firoza is recording this as well. So there was a great, enormous fire in a jungle. And it's a folk story, but I love to share it with people. And all the animals ran away. And there was this little bird that was going to a nearby river and picking up a little water and bringing it, trying to douse the fire. So the lion laughed, everybody laughed at the bird and said, you know, what are you doing? So the bird said, at least I'm doing my little bit. And I told this story to at one of my talks, and I thought that was the story. And the next day, my email box was flooded with, dear ma'am, that's only half the story. And they told me what the rest of the story was. So the rest of the story was that the gods above were watching this little bird. And they felt so sad that they began to cry. And when gods cry, it comes as rain. And the rain doused the fire of the forest. So that shows whatever it is, it doesn't matter whether it's the God of small projects, the God of massive projects. Each one of us can do our bit and continue our journey together in time and space. Thank you.